Hello and welcome. My name is Bengt. I play guitar in the band Action Camp, and in today's episode I'm going to explain the basics of MIDI and how we use it in our band to control and change effects, our in-ear mixes, and trigger samples and loops in Ableton Live. It can seem pretty complex and daunting if you don't come from an electronic music background, but when broken down piece by piece, it's a fairly simple and infinitely powerful tool to do a lot of things on stage that are otherwise impossible or require a lot of gear and fancy footwork. I will preface this whole video right up top to say that many times this will all boil down to the classic RTFM or read the f***ing manual adage. Your gear tells you how it works, you just have to look it up in the manual. With that, let's dive into the scary world of MIDI. First, let's look at the absolute basics of MIDI. It's an acronym and it stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It was introduced in a paper by Dave Smith and Chet Wood of Sequential Circuits around 1981 as a proposed universal method for synthesizers and computers to communicate with each other in music via a 5-pin cable. In more modern iterations, it can also use USB and 1/8-inch TRS cables, but more on that later. So the main features of MIDI. The cable. A single directional 5-pin cable that carries 16 channels of information. Each device can be assigned a specific channel, so it only receives X commands from your source and ignores everything else. For example, my Line 6 HX is my master controller in our entire rig, and my Eventide H9 is set to channel 2, so if I want to change a specific preset on the H9, I just send a program change on channel 2, and only the Eventide H9 understands it. All the other pedals and gear ignore it. The ports. Most but not all MIDI devices allow some form of passing through information, allowing you to chain them together but still control each device independently. If you look at the back of a microKORG, for example, you'll see the most common layout of MIDI ports: in, out, through. In receives MIDI, out sends MIDI, and through passes MIDI from the input onto the next device in line. On guitar pedals, you'll more commonly see just a MIDI in and out port where the out doubles as a through port. This is usually somewhere in the settings for digital pedals. You can turn it on and off if you want that function. The commands. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to focus on a few important things MIDI can do in relation to live performance. The 0 to 127 value, program change, MIDI clock, MIDI notes, and control change. So first, the 0 to 127 value. Everything in MIDI carries a value between 0 and 127. The simplest way to explain that is it's an 8-bit word system, 128 is a multiple of 8, etc., etc. It can represent 128 programs, 128 different control changes, or a control value from 0 to 100%, or MIDI notes through the entire scale of a keyboard. Program change, or PC for short, is how one device tells another to change its preset. That can be a keyboard changing guitar effects, guitar effect pedal changing amp presets or channels on an amp, all kinds of stuff. A lot of devices have 128 presets, so the numbers all correspond 1-to-1, but some are limited, such as the Eventide H9. It has 99 presets, so it understands program change 0 to 98, with 0 being preset number 1 and 98 being preset 99. Our in-ear rack, the Behringer X Air 18, has 64 presets, which they call scenes, so it understands 0 to 63. Now, the numbering can get a little tricky with the offset, but if you keep a spreadsheet or some kind of notation, like I'll show you later how we do it, it's easy to know that X effect on Y pedal is Z program change number. MIDI clock is exactly what it sounds like. It's a clock that keeps time. You can have one central controller setting the tempo of anything else down the chain. Useful to have a preset loaded up that sets all your delays and modulation to 120 BPM, or a single tap tempo that sets the speed of all your delays and modulation all at once. MIDI Notes, as I mentioned before, is the most basic MIDI command. C-1, as in an octave below C0, is MIDI note 0, and G9, like the highest of the scale, is MIDI note 127. You can have a single keyboard controller playing any other synth or many at the same time. I'll get into that a little later, but the Line 6 HX can send notes as well, and I use it to trigger samples and loops in Ableton Live. It's a very handy trick to have. And the last thing I'll cover is control change. Control change, or CC for short, sends a specific command that corresponds with a device's function. For example, my source audio Nemesis delay understands CC101 as the on-off switch. It's binary, so it splits between two values. So if I send CC101 value 0 to 63, the pedal shuts off. If I send CC101 value 64 to 127, the pedal turns on. This is the most common way a toggle switch is assigned. Also on the Nemesis delay, it understands CC6 as the mix knob setting. So a value of 0 is 0% wet, 100% dry, and a value of 127 is 100% wet and no dry signal at all. In my setup, I have the Source Audio Reflex expression pedal that can send 3 MIDI commands at once, so I will often use it to mix the delay in or control its feedback and delay time with my foot. So that's the basic building blocks of the rig I'm breaking down today. The very last bit, which will save you so much time, is the dreaded MIDI implementation charts. This is where I think most folks will gloss over a bit, but it's the most important and kind of the main read the fucking manual moment. Every device that uses MIDI has a chart in the manual, or sometimes as a separate file called MIDI implementation. They look like this, or this, or this, which is the most annoying to read. So what is it? It tells you what MIDI commands that piece of gear can receive and send, and what function on the gear they're assigned to. As I mentioned in the control change section, the Nemesis delay manual lays out which CC value controls what function of the pedal. So for example, if I want to control the delay time, we check the chart and scroll down here. Delay time is CC2, 0 to 127. So I have my Reflex expression pedal running into it. I'll tell it send CC2 from 0 to 127 on channel 5, which is what I have the pedal assigned to in my rig. And there you go. Now, instead of having to bend down and turn the time knob by hand, I can control it with my foot. We're getting close to 10 minutes, which is long for a YouTube video, even instructional stuff. So I'm gonna break this up in 2 pieces. This was kind of the bare bones MIDI commands. This is what you need to know. Next video, I'll show our entire rig, how it's all hooked up together, and how we actually implement all this stuff. I hope you dug this. I hope it was helpful. I definitely wish I had this when I was coming up, because I know this stuff can be really frustrating and stressful and scary. So if you have any questions, shoot me a message, and yeah, thanks for watching.